All right. We're back. Man, I'm frustrated today. Frustrated because the world seems to not care what's going on around us. We've got a nation asleep at the wheel. It just seems like nobody's paying attention. You know, we've all been hearing how the president has been saying for years now that if you had your health care plan and you like your plan, if you liked your doctor, we're not going to affect that, getting Americans to buy in on the whole issue of Obamacare. And now we know the truth. At least some 90 million of us will find out the truth within the next 6 months. That this wasn't about health care. It's not about affordability. It's not about getting health care to 30 million Americans who didn't have health care, because while they're giving 30 million Americans health care at your expense, they're stripping 90 other million Americans of their health care. Give me the justification for that trade-off. Give me the justification for that, for the entire idea of Obamacare. Give me the constitutional justification for making you buy something in commerce in order to be a citizen in good standing. Wow. Well, the Supreme Court passed it, man. It's the rule of law. Really? Well, let me tell you something. The Supreme Court, according to our own founders, is not the final arbiter. The final arbiter of laws and their justice is you, the American people, we the people. It's up to us to collectively stand against tyranny with our words, with our actions, and even with our very lies, if that's what it comes down to. But, you know, this isn't something that the dumbed down and entitlement addicted population of this country is prepared to do. And that's why I find it so very, very frustrating. Because, you know, liberty and tyranny can't exist simultaneously. They can't occupy the same space. Freedom and forcing you to buy something, to not be a criminal, that cannot coexist. The right to bear arms, a fundamental right to self-defense, and the right to go out there and protect and defend, and if necessary, take back your nation, cannot coexist with the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms. You know what Jefferson said? In 1825, now listen, and get this date down right. He wrote to a guy named W.B. Giles. In 1825, right? This is 50 years now. 50 years after the Revolution. And what, 35 years after the complete and total Constitution was ratified and put in place. Here's what he wrote. It is too evident that the three ruling branches of the, and he said national, but we interpret that to mean federal government. It is too evident that the three ruling branches of the national government are in combination to strip their colleagues, the state authorities, of the power reserved by them, and to exercise themselves all functions, foreign and domestic. What does that tell you? That he saw it back then, 35 years after the Constitution was ratified. To make matters worse, the sedition, the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, 6 years after the ratification of the Constitution, and already John Adams, one of the founders, he signed off on. He was president at the time. Signed off on the Sedition Act, which said that if you spoke out against your government, or you spoke out against the president or any of the Congress people, any of the senators, or anybody along those lines, you could be jailed and imprisoned. In fact, we imprisoned literally hundreds and hundreds of Americans over that. That's where those principles of nullification that you hear about once in a while came from. Madison and Jefferson declared that when a law is passed and it is unconstitutional, you are not obligated to follow it. We are the final arbiters, not a Supreme Court that owes its allegiance back to the federal government. So where is somebody in the Obama administration who has the wisdom, the courage to actually step up and say, you know what, being on the inside, I can see how far off this thing is, and I'm going to do something about it? The truth is, you know, that is essentially what Snowden did, isn't it? You know what, Snowden, and I constantly hear people demonize him. He's a traitor. He gave away all our secrets. With all due respect, he didn't give away everything he had, number one. And he purposely, specifically withheld a lot of it because he didn't want individuals to be injured. He kept a lot of information back that he could have dumped. And in fact, what's his name from WikiLeaks there? They've if you don't know about this, by the way, they've put a for all intents and purposes a time bomb out there on the internet. They've dumped this gigabytes of information out there with this encryption package around it that they've promised to release the key if anything ever happens to Snowden. In other words, if he, it shows up on the news one day, at 36 years old, he died of a sudden heart attack or something, right? So where is somebody in this administration who has the foundational beliefs that our nation was built on to say, you know what, this is wrong? James Barber, the Secretary of War back in the day, said, if the alien and sedition laws are unconstitutional, they are not law and, of course, of no force. The Constitution is the law of the land, not some administrative agency. John Adams said, we define a republic to be a government of law and not of men. An act of usurpation is not obligatory. This is a guy named Theophilus Parsons. He turned down John Adams' request to be the Attorney General for the nation at the time. And instead, he opted to be the Chief Justice in his home state of Massachusetts on their Supreme Court for the state, or colony at that time. An act of usurpation is not obligatory. It is not law. Any man may be justified in his resistance to it if he be considered as a criminal by the general government, yet then his own fellow citizens alone can convict him. They are his jury. And if they pronounce him innocent, not all the powers of Congress can hurt him. Even if the supposed law which he resisted was an act of Congress's usurpation. You see, we the people determine that Edward Snowden is not a traitor because it affects us. And all the acts of Congress that are are a usurpation of the rule of law and the constitutional boundaries by which the nation was designed and built and framed, all of that is unconstitutional. It is null and void and of no effect. Any law that's been made by Congress which falls outside the scope of its constitutionally delegated authority, and they are extraordinarily limited, expressly limited, any of that they pass is no law at all. Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, or whatever other name you want to give it, that compels every citizen in this country to engage in commerce. Well, let me ask you this. You're forced by one law to violate your constitutional Fourth Amendment right to privacy, because there's disclaimers all over the site that says they can be used, 1, for the purposes of auditing, 2, for the purposes of investigating you, and 3, that nothing that you submit there is you have a right to privacy or an expectation of it. Okay, so let's just take that into its true context for a moment. You have no expectation of privacy, and the information you submit can be used against you for the purposes of auditing, investigation, and law enforcement. All right. By the way, they hid that in code so that you couldn't find it, but it is in the code. So to make matters worse, let me ask you, how is it one law passed in 2010 can force you to break your Fourth Amendment right to privacy and unlawful search and seizure of you and your effects, including your personal information and your identity, from before 1776? Because that right has been inherent and given to us as an unalienable right by God and nature's God. And so how is it that the law passed in 2010 excuse me, abrogates that right? How is it that it abrogates your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination? So one law passed by 535 people in Washington and then approved by 9 Supreme Court justices trumps everything that history has known. Those rights are unalienable. They can't be overridden by somebody in D.C. or in any given state. And that's a dichotomy that you can't even resolve without actually going back to the Constitution itself. And any claim to the contrary is a lie. You know, they can sit there and then they can throw out all they want about how, well, we've had precedents set in this courts for many, many years, and these precedents hold sway. No, they don't. If you want to know why they don't, then pick up the writings of the founders themselves. Get a hold of some of the stuff that Madison and Jefferson and Washington wrote and read for yourself what their intent was. These are the guys who actually wrote it, the Constitution. They were the guys who were part and parcel of the actual 1776 Declaration of Independence and the revolt that ensued thereafter. These were the guys who marched on bloody feet to fight for the liberty of a nation. And you know what? They wrote all of their theories down in the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers. You know what those papers were? They were designed to educate the general populace about this brand new thing they'd created called the Constitution, because it was up for ratification. And everybody was like, I don't even know what that is. And they said, well, here's a flyer on it. Here's a piece of education that'll give you a primer on it. Here's the Federalist. and our opponents, the anti-federalist papers, that help you understand what we intended. We wrote it. Here's our intent. Here's our foundation. Here's what our thinking and our logic and our reasoning was. They handed that out to the public to try to convince them of the benefits of ratifying the Constitution. So if you want to understand what they were thinking, don't look to some judge. Look to the people who wrote it. If you wanted to investigate a contract, you don't go and look only at the contract. You go back to the two people who signed it, and you say, well, what did you think this contract was for? And what did you think this contract was for? And mark my words, a contract it is. You're not obligated to participate in the contract when the terms of the contract have changed and breach has occurred. And this is breach. All right. You've been listening to America's Voice now. There are days, I tell you, doing this 5 days a week, sometimes it gets very frustrating because you just keep seeing the torrent of negativity that comes out of every news cycle. Every day, it's more and more and more abusive, tyrannical measures and actions by a group of people that clearly don't have our best interest at heart. And I tell you, it's hard to see it every day and not just throw your hands up in total and utter abject disgust. America, the time is coming short. We cannot sit and just indefinitely wait for something to come and save us. There is no thing. You know, I'm going to finish this and then I'm going to wrap it up. There's a comment I posted up on Facebook. I want you to hear it. You can look it up if you want. And how we burned in the camps later, thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family? Or if during periods of mass arrest, as for example in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and at every step on the staircase. But they had understood they had nothing left to lose and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand. The organs would very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt. If we didn't love freedom enough. And even more, we had no awareness of the real situation. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterwards. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I pray that America will not awaken to say how we burned in those camps later, thinking, what would things have been like? You've been listening to America's Voice Now. You can find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And you can find every show that we do up on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. I hope and pray that America comes to its senses, comes to a vast, massive awakening, and quickly. Because the opportunity for us to tip the scales back in our favor is rapidly disappearing. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.